everyone, my name is Cindy Lee. I'm an instructor of this course, Intercultural Business and Communication. Today we are going to look at synthetic culture to increase our intercultural knowledge. And today we are going to look at the session 2. So you have already studied the session 1, and we have studied 5 cultural dimensions in session 1. So today we are going to look at another session, another 5 cultural dimensions. Okay, now let's begin with this content page. So today we are going to look at these 5 cultural dimensions. They include cultural communication context, time perception, and emotions, how people reveal and express their emotions, and lifestyle, how do people balance their working time and personal time, and the relationship with nature, how do people work with their living environment. Okay, now let's look at the first cultural dimension. Now let's look at today's first cultural dimension, communication context. Communication context. The context here indicates the schemata behind communication process. In some cultures, people tend to communicate explicitly. Most messages are delivered and are put into words. People can be very direct. So here, explicitly means very, very clearly. So how can be very clear? Of course, people will try to say everything in words. Okay? Then in other kind of cultures, people can be indirect in words, and many messages are delivered through nonverbal communication and subtle cultural understanding. So what does it mean? In other cultures, when people feel, for example, feel sorry, feel angry, feel very unhappy, they don't necessarily say it out. They will use their facial expressions or gestures, body movements, all these non-verbal communication methods to deliver their messages. So they try not to use words to show direct messages. Okay, so this is what we say communication context. But when people use nonverbal communication, they use a lot of gestures and body language, for example. That will rely on people's cultural understanding. So normally when people live in the same place, they live in the same culture, they can understand the meaning of their signs and of their gestures, so they don't need to say every word to show everything, every meaning. Now, let's look at this. In the cultural dimension, there are 2 extremes in this spectrum. One is a high context communication style. The other one is low context communication style. So high context here means that the cultural understanding between people and the schemata behind the communication process is complex. Okay, so it means people need a lot of understanding between each other. People need a lot of subtle agreements between each other in order to understand each other. And a low context communication style, in low context communication culture, people don't need so much subtle understanding behind the communication process. Why? Because they will say everything in words. So, for example, if they would like to accept your offer, they like you, they will tell you, okay, no problem, I take this offer, I like you. And however, if they don't like you, they don't want to accept this offer, they will refuse you directly as well. So they will say, no, I don't like you. No, I'm not going to do this. Alright, so they can be very direct. But in high context culture, people will be more indirect. They may not say no to you. They may say, alright, I will think about this. They may not say no directly to you, but actually they mean they don't want to take this job or this offer. So they'll try to be indirect and they don't want to hurt your feelings. Okay, so these are two different kind of communication contexts. So how this cultural dimension and different cultural values affect our work in business? The first thing is we will see there are task-oriented culture or relationship-oriented culture. In low context culture, people tend to focus on the task, the things they do in the workplace. But in high context culture, people will tend to concern about the relationships. Why? Because they don't want to jeopardize their relationships with others. So they will try to use the indirect way to deliver their messages. Okay, and contract dealing, when people sign up in contract, in high context culture, they will try to use standardized contracts more. But in low context culture, they may write up the kind of detailed contract. So in a contract, they will predict all kinds of bad consequences, or they will assume what kind of real liabilities or responsibilities that each party has to take. So they will probably say that if something bad happens, okay, which party has to take what kind of responsibility. But in high context culture, when they write up their contract, they may not put so many details because they will prefer to trust people. They will prefer not to write down all those negative things in terms and conditions in their contract. Okay, so now you can understand that in high context culture, face saving is important. People will see saving people's and other people's face is important, is valued. But in low context culture, they don't think about so much about face. They will focus on the tasks, the things they do. Alright, so this will also affect how people have their meetings, how do they hold their conferences. So for example, in high context culture, when people have meeting together, the subordinate or the younger employee may not offend their supervisors, their managers in public in the meeting or in the conference. But in a low context culture, even younger people or junior employees or subordinates, they may just express their opinions directly and show their objection directly to their managers or supervisors. So this will affect different kind of conference styles. Okay, so now do you know about this cultural dimension? Now, if you have already had some understanding about communication context, now let's move on. So next, let's look at the time perception. Okay, time perception means how people perceive time. Time is always very important in business life. Many cross-cultural misunderstandings are caused by people's perceptions of time. In some cultures, people perceive time flexibly, while in other cultures, people view time sequentially. The meaning of a deadline can be very different from one culture to another. Okay, so what does it mean here? In some cultures, we have heard that very often, time is money. Time is money, right? Okay, so it means that when people do things in their workplace, they probably care about time very much. But in other cultures, you will often hear people say, hey, take your time. Means do your job, do your things properly, and you can take time to do that thing. You can take time to perfect the thing you're doing. So there are different kind of concepts, right? So in some cultures, people tend to see time more flexibly, means that they can take time, take easy in their business life. But in other cultures, when people tend to see time as a sequential line, it means that they arrange their day they arrange their time into different slots, into very small segments. So, for example, if they arrange something at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then they will arrange another thing at 9 o'clock. So it means that between 8 and 9, very often they do one thing in one go. So when they finish the first thing, then they will continue to do the second thing. In this sense, you will find that deadline will be very important to them, right? Because if the first thing is delayed, the second thing, the third thing, the fourth thing, and their everyday life will be all delayed, then their life will become a mess. So when people view time sequential means in order. Then deadline will be very important. They want to be punctual and they want to finish things one by one. Okay, so this is in contrast to those who see time flexibly. When people see time flexibly, they tend to do things. They tend to do many things in one time. So they can continue doing this, continue doing that from this hour to another hour. Okay, so there are different perceptions of time. So here we call these two different kind of concepts as monochronic culture and polychronic culture. Mono means single. Okay, so when people see time as a sequential line, they do one task, they do one thing at one time. This is monochronic culture. And poly means multiple. When people in polychronic culture do things, what do? They will tend to do several tasks at the same time, and they will try to see time in a more flexible and more relaxing way. Okay, so how these two different kind of cultural values affect our business life? The first thing is the definition of a deadline. In monochronic culture, people will give you a deadline in a very accurate way. Like, okay, please hand in this paper, please hand in this report at 9 o'clock on 10th of October. So they will give you an exact time for the deadline. And if you miss the deadline, well, that may cause responsibility or reliability. But for people from polychronic culture, when they give a deadline or when they think about a deadline, they may think about a period of time. So, for example, they will tell you that, okay, please hand in this report by 10th of October. Okay, so it means that, well, you can hand in these reports on 9th of October, or you can hand in at 9 o'clock in the morning of 10th of October, or in the afternoon during the day. So the deadline can be a period for polychronic people, but deadline for monochronic people is an exact time normally. Alright, so when people from different cultures work together, would this cause misunderstanding or would this cause problem? Yes, this kind of different definition on deadline very often cause misunderstanding or even business conflict. So people need to pay attention to this kind of problem. Alright, and next one is punctuality. Alright, in monochronic culture, punctuality is very important. When they make appointment with you like 9 o'clock in the morning, they will expect to see you at 9 o'clock sharp in the office. So it means that you should be a little bit earlier, right, to be prepared. And then at 9 o'clock at sharp, you are there already. But in polychronic culture, people are more flexible. So when they make an appointment with you, like at 9 o'clock in the morning, they may be 5 minutes late. In some countries, 10 minutes late is okay. So it really depends on people's perception of time. So you can imagine that if you come from polychronic culture and you make appointment with the people from monochronic culture, and then you're 5 minutes late or you're 10 minutes late to monochronic monochronic culture people, they tend to think, oh, you're not professional, or you're not sincere, or you don't care about our meeting. There can be some misunderstanding. But for polychronic people, they probably think, oh, you're too serious, or why you're angry so easily. So pay attention to time, okay? So if you work with the people with the different cultural conventions and cultural values, and let's think about how can we feel more comfortable with each other. Now, the last one is multitasking and single tasking. As I said, for people from monochronic culture, when they are having meetings, because they tend to do one thing at one time, so when they are in the meeting, maybe they just focus on the meeting, and now they have an appointment with you, they talk to you only. But for people from polychronic culture, they are multitasking people. So what they will do in the meeting, they probably talking to you, but at the same time they also type something, and maybe when their phone rings, they will also answer the phone. And you can imagine that this kind of behavior may be very strange or even rude to people from monochronic culture, but it's common for people in polychronic culture. So think about this, okay? Because people perceive time differently. They may not offend you deliberately. No, people normally don't do that in business. But because of different cultural values, different cultural conventions, people can behave differently. So just let's think about it, how we can take this intercultural difference, keep this difference in mind, and in the future we can adapt our behavior in our intercultural workplace.